Hi everybody, I am Mr. Jacklin and I work in the Hazels class in Year 1 at Southview Primary School and I'm a teaching assistant. Today I'm going to be reading from the book Woof and this is chapter 15, The Dog File. For the remainder of that week, Eric and Roy continued to give much thought to the question, when would Eric change again? Or, as the days passed, would he change again? Eric himself had trouble getting to sleep at night and woke up each morning in a state of some anxiety. Roy couldn't sleep either. He kept thinking he could hear a howling dog. During the day, he stayed as close to Eric as he could for as long as he could. He made too frequent, Eric said, inquiries about how he was feeling. The other question, which occupied them, was, of course, why was he changing? This, in fact, took more of their time than the first question. They talked incessantly about it, read dog books to each other and made notes. Eric made notes. Inevitably, their schoolwork suffered. Roy especially heard very little that his teachers had to say during this period. On Tuesday morning, Eric came to school with one dog book and a pocket-sized clip file, complete with a paper and cardboard section dividers. It also had a pencil down the spine. It was a so far unused Christmas present from his gran. Roy came to school, staggered would be the nearer the truth, with all three of his books, plus his granddad's Guinness Book of Records and a bag of apple peel and carrot tops for the rabbits. They neared the school gates. Eric showed Roy the file and explained its purpose. We're going to collect data, he said. It was a phrase he'd come upon inside the lid of his junior science kit. What's data? Notes, said Eric. Lists and things from the dog books. How about tracing? Well, the question is, what makes a boy turn into a dog? We might not need tracings for that. But I like tracings, said Roy. In the playground, Roy brought up the subject of colour blindness. Dogs were supposed to be colour blind. That's what he'd read. I wasn't colour blind, said Eric. You should have been, said Roy. According to this, he also found the rarest breed of dog in the Guinness Book of Records. You should have been a Chinese fighting dog. They're worth quids. And he said, they eat dogs in China, you know. Later that morning, there was a lull in the classroom. Mr. Cork, with the help of a few girls, was pinning children's work up on the walls, though he was due to leave on Friday and would take most of it with him. Mrs. Jessup was in the staff room with the slow readers. Eric opened the dog book and began to read. Roy did likewise. After a time, Eric said, I might not be the first. Think of that. The first what? Said Roy. As an aid to concentration, he had his hands over his ears, though he heard Eric well enough. Boy to turn into a dog, said Eric. Listen to this. The screen's most versatile acting dog was Teddy. That's no name for a dog, said Roy. In one remarkable routine, filmed entirely without a break, Teddy opened the kitchen door, lit the stove with a match held between his teeth, filled the kettle at the sink, put it on the stove, and then, picking up a broom, swept the floor. He could play comedy or drama with equal ease. Never missed a cue, and his phenomenal, said Roy. Phenomenal memory put many a two-legged co-star to shame. Eric and Roy were silent for a moment. Roy said, No dog could do all that. That's what I think. Eric opened his bag and took out the clip file. I bet he was a boy. Eric and Roy were much taken with the idea that other boys before Eric could have turned into dogs. Even on the way home from school, they were still discussing it. As they window shopped in Russell's sweet shop, Eric spoke of the Wolf boys in India he'd read about. Perhaps there was a clue there. Roy said he was sure there was an elephant man, but couldn't remember where he'd heard of him. Anyway, he never turned into an elephant. I don't think. He only looked like one. Then Kenny Biggs joined them, picked up a snatch of their conversation and offered a thought of his own. I heard a talking dog once. When? Said Eric. Where? Said Roy. On the radio months ago. It was Australian. Hey, I remember that, said Roy. Yes, said Kenny. It could say mum and sausage and egg. And he said, Kenny was clearly intent on being useful, I heard a singing cat as well. On Wednesday, Eric and Roy continued to speculate. At 9 o'clock, as they lined up in the playground, Roy said, I've been thinking, you could have dreamt it, you know. No, said Eric. Anyway, if I dreamt it, what were you doing? Perhaps I dreamt it as well. And Hopper? Yes. And Kenny and my mum and yours? Well, it's possible, said Roy. Then, as a glare from Mrs. Jessup cut short the conversation, anything is. Later in the classroom, during an art lesson with Mr. Cork, Roy took up the idea again. He was still not convinced. He could have dreamt all of it, he said. Hopper and everything. We could be dreaming now. Pinch yourself, then, said Eric. Better still, I'll pinch you. No, even better, I'll stick these compasses in you. If you yell out, you were dreaming. That won't prove it, said Roy. He smiled and edged away. I could be dreaming I'm yelling. That afternoon, at 2 o'clock, all the 3rd and 4th years trooped out of school up Rolfe Street, down Ethel Street, across Joinings Bank, and into Hobby's recreation ground. This was where the school sports would be held on Saturday. Today, however, it was the heats, plus demonstrations of technique from various members of staff. Mr. Hodge and Mr. Cork, baton changing, Mrs. Jessup, rounders ball, and Mr. Blocker, the starting pistol. The weather was warm and sunny. When they were not competing, Eric and Roy sat on the grass with the rest of the class 3 and watched the others and talked. It says here, said Roy, he still had one of his books with him, each year more than 4,000 British postmen are bitten by dogs. My dad never gets bitten, said Eric. The post office procedure following an assault is to send a letter of complaint to the owner. Hey, this is good. Which the postman has to deliver. Just then, Joan Spooner and Caroline Wicks came hobbling towards them. They were tied together with the skipping rope, practicing the 3-legged race. Joan said, What are you reading? A dog book, I'll bet. And she said, They're mad about dogs, them too. Where's Alison? Said Eric, but got no reply as the girls at that point tumbled over and rolled noisily away. In any case, he knew where she was. She was tied to Sheila Smith. Joan and Alison had quarrelled earlier that day and were not speaking. Then Roy said, There's a dog. The dog, a black and white collie, was sniffing along the perimeter fence a short way off. From time to time it paused and peed against one of the wooden posts. It's marking its territory, said Eric. I read about that. Territory? Roy laughed. It doesn't own all of this. It's Hobby's. He turned and threw a handful of grass at Tony Abell, who had previously thrown one at him. He said, Hey Eric, I've been thinking. Did you ever... He nodded towards the now departing dog. You know, no, said Eric. Not even no, said. At that moment, there was a commotion down the track. Mr. Blocker could be seen looking particularly fierce. Mr. Hodge was running towards the main gate. Hopper, it seemed, had just thrown the rounders ball into the road. It's a record, said Roy. On Thursday, Rolfe Street Primary was closed for polling. There was a by-election. Eric went to town with his mum in the morning to get a pair of walking boots. In the afternoon, Roy came round. The two of them spent their time in the garden. They paddled in Emily's play pool, she was at her gran's, and sat in the Wendy house. Eric showed Roy some work he'd done in the clip file, now known as the dog file. It's a list of theories. It's not finished yet. Roy took the file and began to read. Not the first theory. Well, you should have put that second then. The rays from space theory, the reincarnation theory, Well, that's as far as I've got, said Eric. Roy stuck his head out of the side of the Wendy house. It was made of plastic sheeting and looked up at the sky. What about the Chinese fighting dog theory? That's not a theory, said Eric. What about... Roy turned and made a grab for Eric's ankle. The body snatcher theory. Let go, what's that? Said Eric. Dunno, said Roy. But it sounds good. Roy, in fact, was remembering a film that had been shown on TV a couple of months ago. The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. He'd only seen the trailer, and not all of that. His mum had switched off. Even so, from the title alone, it surely had some relevance to Eric's situation. At 3 o'clock, Roy accompanied Eric to collect Emily from her gran's. Eric's gran gave each of them an ice lolly from her freezer. Emily had been grumpy when they arrived, not wanting to leave, but with an ice lolly in her hand, she soon cheered up. Eric and Roy took it in turns to push her doll's pushchair, leaving Emily free to concentrate on licking. Roy's lolly was the first to go, then Eric's. Emily's, though it dribbled down her arm and on a t-shirt, lasted longer. Eric said, "I'll give you 5p for a lick." "No," said Emily. "10p. No. £10? No." Eric laughed. He often liked to play this game with Emily, just for the fun of hearing her say no. He loved, above all, the certainty in which she said it. Then Roy joined in. "I'll give you all the houses in this street." "No." "In this town," said Eric. "In the world," said Roy. "No." "I'll give you Eric," said Roy. "I'll give you Roy," said Eric. Emily sucked the final lump of her lolly into her mouth, licked her sticky thumb, and stared up at them. "No," she said. On Friday morning, when Eric woke up, as he was still a boy, when they met on the paper round, Roy automatically almost said, "Anything?" Eric shook his head. "How are you feeling now?" "Normal. It's been a whole week, you know." "I know." Eric could sense Roy's disappointment and was about to comment on it, when, suddenly, a small boy came up to him and asked where he could get a puppy from. "How should I know?" said Eric. "How should I know?" said Eric. The boy became immediately confused. "Well, I heard, a big girl told me, on the dinner table." He fiddled with his buttons on his jumper. "You were the one to ask." "Joan, I'll bet," said Roy. "That big girl's up the creek," said Eric. "Oh," said the boy. And Roy said, "Tell your mum to try the RSPCA." An hour later, in his room, as he gathered his school things together, Eric considered the extent to which his secret was spreading. Only Roy knew everything, of course, but quite a few others, Hopper and Kenny, Joan and Alison, not to mention Caroline and Sheila, knew something, or at least thought they did. And now there was this infant. Meanwhile, the main dropper of hints himself was on the way to call for Eric. He had a bag on his shoulder, a ball at his feet, and a book in his hand. He'd been reading about the relative merits of dog baskets and kennels. Roy, in truth, had a small secret of his own. He was swatting up, mostly at home, everything he could find about the care of dogs. Grooming, bedding, vitamins and health, dogs and the law, everything. But he'd so far said nothing to Eric about it, in case his motives were misunderstood. The main events at school that day were a long speech about Sports Day and Mr. Blocker in the morning, and the departure of Mr. Cork in the afternoon. It was the end of his school practice. There were presents from him and his rabbit, and cheers and tears and requests for autographs and increasingly nosy questions. What was his first name? Where did he live? Had he got a girlfriend? Could they write to him? Then he was gone, and the sudden silence of the bare walls, he'd taken most of his work with them, left everyone feeling rather solemn for a while. On the way home, Eric and Roy discussed Mr. Cork's merits and compared him with other students they had known. "I'm going to be a student," said Roy. "What are you going to study?" "Something," Roy said. He balanced along the wall outside the Ebenezer Chapel and fell off before the end. He threw his jockey cap in the air, aiming to graze the overhanging branch of a tree, and said, "Hey, werewolves, think of that." So that's the end of chapter 15 of the book Woof. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you're all reading lots at home and at school. Goodbye.